Content of the following program, including all statements from the hosts and guests, is to provide general information and commentary about the law. Under no circumstances does any statement made by the host or guest to a caller or listener constitute legal advice or the formation of an attorney-client relationship, and the material from this program shall not be viewed as substitute for a personal consultation with an attorney. Now, prepare yourself to be informed and entertained by Gus Bravo and Neil Kotze, two AV-rated trial lawyers who have been practicing law for a combined total of nearly 40 years. For the next 30 minutes, they will share their insight and commentary on important legal issues affecting all of us.
We all know about the battle between lawyers and doctors and how they always fight with one another. Well, and how they're always competing with one another. Well, the National Research Council and the National Academy of Sciences today released the results of a very, very interesting study. In that study, they gave equal samples of Viagra to 1,000 lawyers and 1,000 doctors. The doctors all increased their sexual prowess. The lawyers all got taller. The results, no one understands. Good evening. My name's Neil Kotze. This is Welcome to Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil, and I'm laughing because
I give you a delayed laugh. That was the best joke yet.
I started without Gus because he is 30 seconds late. He is soaking wet from the rain, but since last show he gave me such a hard time.
Did I don't recall doing
I think you gave me a hard time. So I decided I was going to start without him because I'm not as nice as he is. He at least waited for me. We started the show late. I knew he was going to be...
The only reason I waited because you're the one that says a joke.
Oh, is that what it is?
Well, it literally is raining cats and dogs out there.
It is. For all of those, for the people listening in the car, really drive safely because we both vowed in light of last week to get here early. And I didn't get here until 5 minutes to 6. It took me almost an hour from Plantation. And Gus, you were right behind me.
We're accustomed to rain living down here in South Florida, but this is pretty spectacular. We had a lot of lightning and whatnot. I think that they're coming in because the video is only getting the better half of my face.
That's what you get for being late, Gus. So
I'm going to show my haircut.
For those of you watching on video now, that is our producer, Freddie Santori, walking by as he adjusts the camera for Gus.
To make sure the star of the show is properly focused, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So, welcome again to Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil. Neil, that was a wonderful joke. Thank you very much for that.
Did you hear it?
I heard the last end of it, which I'm sure when I replay later tonight,
fair enough.
Be funny. Well, we have a lot of stuff in store today. But I don't know if you want to introduce anybody here yet, or we want to wait.
We have our good friend from Jim Quinn from Veritex Reporting, who's sitting in the studio. Say hi, Jim. They might hear you, actually.
Thanks for having me.
Trust us, that was Jim sitting in the corner.
Exactly. For those of you that are going to listening now, please stay tuned for next show on next Monday. Gus is going to be taking a very, I would say well-deserved, but not really, vacation. But he will be phoning in.
Workcation.
A workcation. And Jim, who is with one of the nation's leading court reporting agencies, Veritex, is going to be co-hosting the show with me, and he's going to bring a court reporter along to tell some interesting war stories about how terrible lawyers are. So if you want to hear how, because we never talk about that, so if you want to hear how terrible lawyers are to court reporters and some interesting, funny stories, please tune in next week for that.
Yes. So anyways, just before we get to the meat of our show today, we're going to talk about...
we have meat today?
Yes.
Okay.
Plenty. I wanted to recap a little bit of the sports weekend. Because
you really want to be a sports anchor at heart.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Exactly.
If you're listening, I'm the guy. So I don't know if you've been following any of the not the World Cup.
The Women's World Cup.
Well, the Women's World Cup, that's separate.
But the women...
USA tomorrow plays against Germany. Good for them, etc. But I'm from Chile. So we have the Copa America going on right now in Chile. And last week, Chile played in the quarterfinal match against Uruguay. I know you were intently watching that game on Wednesday. Well, something happened in that game. And there's a picture, hopefully will come up here, of the soccer. This is a soccer game. Chile's playing against Uruguay, which is its arch nemesis, or one of Chile's arch nemesis, if you will. I call it arch nemesis because we always lose to them. So I guess for us, it's arch nemesis.
So for the Dolphins, every team in the NFL would be their arch nemesis?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
So anyways, I have a picture that eventually will come up of the Chilean player and the Uruguayan player.
Bueller.
And so this is towards the end of the game. The score's tied 0-0. The Uruguayan player already has a yellow card. Now, if you know anything about soccer, you know.
You showed me this picture.
Okay. So hopefully the picture will come up. If it's not coming up, then we're having technical difficulties, which I'm sure we'll attribute it to the rain. But the picture, which is now been shown worldwide, was the Uruguayan player retaliated to, let's just say, there
it is.
Okay.
For those of you listening.
For those of you listening, you'd have to Google Jara, Jara, Jara. So the Chilean player comes from behind literally, the Uruguayan player, and greets him hello. Neil, do you want to describe for our listeners what we're seeing right here?
You know, in some ways, we could make a joke that this is going to be a very nice transition to the Supreme Court opinion we're going to talk about.
I was going to give you that opportunity.
You knew I would go there.
Which is exactly why I chose this topic. So anyways, what it raises an interesting point. This, obviously, let's just say that the Chilean player is grabbing the Uruguayan player in one of the two places, probably, that you would not want to be grabbed at any point, especially during the game.
Well, you wouldn't want to be grabbed during a soccer game. I mean, what people do in the privacy of their own home is a completely different
Neil, I think that's too much information for what you may do in the privacy of your own home. But this crossed the line. Look, I'm Chilean. I can tell you this crossed the line. And so the Chilean player has been suspended for 3 games. But one of the topics that came up was, is this a criminal act? You know, I mean, is there assault and a battery on a sporting event? I mean, we can come up with examples of where people have crossed the line. You know, you remember years back when the coach for the Houston Rockets, I forget what his name was, Rudy Tomjanovich, I think his name is. He got sucker punched in a basketball NBA game and completely knocked out. I mean, that's beyond something wrong in a game. That's potentially criminal.
The same issues come up in hockey when they hit each other over the stick.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
Jim's mentioning the hockey.
Right. And so there's a point where you go too far. Right, and so the Uruguayan Federation is trying to bring some kind of criminal charges against the Chilean. But, you know, I thought it was interesting, sporting event coupled with, I think, a nice segue to our next topic, which, Neil, you want to introduce our next topic?
Well, I mean, we try to talk about current events in the news, and I think if you go through Facebook, social media, and really everybody's talking about the Obergefell decision, which is the Supreme Court decision that came out saying that gay marriage.
So we have a picture up. I tried to find
a picture of the
most
Court.
benign. So I did a Google search, SCOTUS, which is obviously short for Supreme Court of the United States, and gay marriage. And so this, in my opinion, was the most benign picture that I could find. I would still, convey the topic.
But a very interesting opinion from the Supreme Court. I mean, analyzing under the 14th Amendment, which is the Equal Protection Clause, that the Constitution does protect gay marriage, and any state law prohibiting gay marriage would be unconstitutional as a matter of law.
One of the things we want to avoid are politics here. Because, I think...
Really?
I think we know which side of the coin we both fall under here. But I think what's interesting to me, politics aside, is just how quickly this change came about. I think if you look at the history of this issue,
absolutely,
the gay marriage issue, you're probably talking in approximately a decade, which for if you compare it to, the Civil Rights Act and the women's suffrage and some other social issues, it's taken much longer to actually, have that change be at least enacted by the Supreme Court. And maybe that's a poor choice of words on my part, enacted, because you had an interesting point about the Supreme Court and what this is this is declaring something unconstitutional, right?
Right. I mean, this is the Supreme Court saying that it is the law of the land that gay marriage is protected as a fundamental right under the U.S. Constitution. Now, there are times when the Supreme Court can issue a decision declaring a statute unconstitutional, let's say a federal statute, that Congress can go and revise the statute. Here, they're taking a position that an act, a statute banning gay marriage would be unconstitutional matter of law, so there is no way to rectify that. Although Texas, I don't know if you've seen what I was reading on the news, what Texas has now done.
Religious?
In that the Attorney General of Texas today instituted a new policy that if you are a justice of the peace in Texas or have any state authority to perform a marriage ceremony, and you object to gay marriage on religious grounds, you are not required to perform that ceremony as a matter of law. You would need to find someone else. Now, what'll be interesting is in Texas, how many someone else's will there be? And hopefully there'll be
There'll
other
be
people.
plenty of someone else's.
And so what will
I mean, the reality is you only need a notary. I mean, I don't know how the law is in Texas, but
each state is different in that regard.
right.
So I don't know Texas law.
But for instance, my wife and I, we got married 3 times, and so the reason for it,
with no divorces in between. You need to
Absolutely,
clarify that.
absolutely.
This is no Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton situation. Here,
no,
right?
absolutely. So again, the first time we got married is a civil ceremony. Second time it was in Chile, and the third time was in front of our family here in Ohio, which is where I'm heading tomorrow. But the first time was just we went to the courthouse, Miami-Dade County, the clerk's office, got our marriage license, and then we actually went to Key West to have a civil ceremony in front of in a garden called Nancy's Secret Garden, which was very secretive because we got lost for about 30 minutes,
Right.
couldn't find it, and we had a notary there that just did the ceremony, and that was sufficient. But what's interesting here is the religious angle, because the next hot button item, I think, is going to be the religious freedom, right? I mean, but people are
Exactly.
going
Texas. I don't think this is the end of the debate by any
No.
stretch of the imagination, and it's going to be interesting to see what different states do. But one of the things that I think is important to look at is the Supreme Court. We have 3 branches of government. Obviously, we have the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. The judicial branch of all 3 is the one that's the most hamstrung in many ways. The legislative branch can pass whatever law it wants initially. They can pass a law out of spite. They can pass a law because they are prejudiced against gay and lesbian community. They have that right. That doesn't mean it's right, but they have that right. It's then up to the courts to look at that law.
Right.
But the court is still hamstrung. The court can only look at a law like that and determine that it's valid or invalid because it either violates the Constitution or it violates some other law. The court can't on its own just look at a law and say, we don't like this. The 9 justices can't say, this is just a bad law.
Which is, I think you're paraphrasing Roberts's
Exactly.
argument.
I mean, and what I just want people to understand, because I've seen a lot in social media about people saying that the 4 justices who dissented are all prejudiced
Burn
against.
them in effigy.
Right, exactly. and look, we can take the 4 one at a time, and there might be some, and I'm not going to ascribe motives to different judges. But the one thing Judge Roberts, I think, if you read Justice Roberts, who's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, if you look at Justice Roberts' dissent, it really, as a matter of legal analysis, is a very well-written dissent. I think at the end of the day, because of the way that the 5 justices determined it to fit within the 14th Amendment, those 5 justices probably made the right legal decision. I clearly think it's the right decision morally. But if you just put your lawyer hat on and look at the Constitution, Justice Roberts' dissent is a very interesting read. And I think anybody who believes that Justice Roberts dissented solely because he has some prejudice, I think is not being fair to him.
No, I think it's not a prejudice. It's more of a prejudice, not a political prejudice. I think it's more of a prejudice to his judicial doctrine. Right, that
exactly.
They're the strict constructionists.
And the states' rights. He's more of a states' rights. I mean, some of the quotes from his opinion, we may get to those. I know we have to get up to the break soon, but some of the quotes from his opinion show that he really felt like this was an issue for the states and not a federal constitutional issue. And again, I'm not saying he's right or wrong because I'm not going to pretend to have the constitutional background and knowledge of Justice Roberts. But
not even close.
Not even close. I bet I could try a case against him, though.
You're going to pretend.
He and I would be an interesting try case against him. But no, I mean, that is a mental prowess that we could all aspire to. But it's a very interesting opinion.
Yeah. And so when we come back from the break, because we're coming up on the break now, we'll continue talking about the gay marriage opinion. And obviously, if you have any questions or comments for us and you want to attack some of Neil's political views, 888-565-1470. You're listening to Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil.
Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil is being brought to you by the law offices of Neil D. Codsing and Bravo Law. Bravo Law is a business litigation firm known for providing common sense solutions to small businesses and individuals throughout South Florida. Mr. Bravo is rated AV by Martindale Hubble and Superb by AVVO. the highest ratings available from these two entities. The law offices of Neil D. Conci is a litigation boutique with offices in Broward and Miami-Dade counties. Mr. Conci is a veteran trial lawyer with nearly 25 years of jury trial experience. He is also a two-time recipient of the South Florida Daily Business Review's Most Effective Lawyer Award, a recipient of numerous awards for providing pro bono legal services, and has been recognized by the National Law Council. Call our office, 786-464-0841 or 954-790-6711 and get informed. You're listening to Attorney Confidential with Gus and Nei. If you have a comment, question, or just want to contribute to the conversation, call the show at 888-565-1470 and share your thoughts on what's going on. Now, back to Gus and Nei for more Attorney Confidential.
And we're back with Attorney Confidential with Gus and Nei. 888-565-1470 for those of you who want to call in. I was actually, when I was driving, rushing here through the rain, trying to make sure I got here on time because I knew if I was just 30 seconds late, it would completely negate your 5.5-minute tardiness last week. Right. Well, anyways, I was actually listening to 1470 and the guys before us. I'm sure you know this because you listen, religiously. We're giving financial advice. And actually, we're giving pretty good financial advice, talking about IRAs and Roths and all that stuff, which things I'm sure we could all benefit from. So if you have
to have money first.
Yes. So along those lines, please call us, 888-565-1470. You still have any koozies left?
I do have a few koozies left.
Okay.
So any caller will get a koozie and free 30 minutes advice.
Any caller, or do you want to make it
Well, we only have 15 minutes left, so if I get nervous, I'll keep the caller on for 15 minutes. And
Any caller on this show?
Right.
Okay, so we clarified it.
Oh, geez.
Hey, you got to be careful with the words.
What a lawyer.
You got to be careful with the words. Speaking of words, look, this is going to be we're speaking about the Supreme Court opinion on gay marriage, which, how do you pronounce that last name? Was it the
Oberfeld? What, Obergfell.
Right.
Or I think it's Obergfell.
Yeah, I don't. Don't ask. It's one of those unfortunate names.
Obergfell that leads the
over
opinion.
time. So
why couldn't it be the Smith case?
One of the cases that started this whole momentum, and I was.
You're going to talk about Bowers, aren't you?
Bowers v. Hardwick. You want to explain to our listeners what that case was?
Bowers v. Hardwick. I forget the state that was involved.
Georgia.
It was Georgia. Figures. Georgia had an anti-sodomy law. I don't think we're going to explain sodomy if you don't know what it is. Look it up. Google sodomy.
But don't pick on the images.
It comes from Sodom and Gomorrah. If you have biblical, but had an anti-sodomy law, and in Bowers versus Hardwick, that's when the Supreme Court knocked down the anti-sodomy law in Georgia. Interesting. When you're going to have a case, though, you really have to have somebody named Hardwick in an anti-sodomy case. But anyway, but yes, that was
86.
That was,
and so right. That eventually was struck down in early 2000s.
Right.
There's a great website called 538. I was talking to you about it earlier. And it's New York Times, so it's okay to go down there. It's every now and then it's the left-leaning, journal, or it's actually a blog. But this guy, I forget his name, he is a statistician, and 538 comes from the total number of electoral votes. So he's then expanded now into other areas. For instance, he was picking the Women's World Cup, and he was putting percentages on.
Imagine lawyers that want to talk about sports. I have to think if I know one.
Well, he's not just a lawyer. He's not a lawyer, actually. He's just a journalist.
Interesting.
It's about numbers. So, anyways, he gave a history of how we got to where we got to. But I know that we haven't much time left. I know that there were a couple of phrases.
And one of the things and this is important because Gus and I have joked a little bit about our different political backgrounds, but
one's right, one's wrong.
Don't be that hard on yourself, Gus. It's okay. You can be wrong. But in all seriousness is that, and I said this earlier when I was talking about the opinion, I do believe morally that the Supreme Court got it right. I think that I have very many friends who are gay and lesbian. The Miami Shores area where I live, it has a very large gay and lesbian population. I have friends who are now getting married as a result of this opinion, and I think it's the right call morally. But I do think it's interesting if you want to be a strict legal analysis of the Constitution. And I don't know whether Justice Roberts got it right or wrong, but I do think that those people who are trying to hang him in effigy and saying that he's anti-gay lesbian, I really do think that there are times, I always find it funny, I said this to Gus earlier, that people talk about if you criticize President Obama, you're a racist. Yet think of the entire liberal media going after Justice Thomas right now, who is our only black Supreme Court justice for his dissenting opinion. No one's calling them racists. It's not about whether someone's black or white or whether someone's gay or not gay. Sometimes people do make decisions that hurt those respective communities because they think it's the right decision as a matter of law, and not because of some prejudice.
No, I agree completely. And I think the Supreme Court is again, we've spent a lot of time on it because it's so critical. Right. I mean, it is the final. The final stop, right? The buck stops with them. And I think what's great about the system is that these justices are appointed for life. So even though, there may be politics driving the initial appointment, once they're in there, history tells us they're going to adhere more to their judicial doctrine than the political.
Absolutely, one. Of course, because who appointed the justice who wrote the opinion?
Kennedy. Well, no, Justice Kennedy.
Justice Kennedy, but who was he appointed by?
Was it Reagan?
Bush.
Oh, Bush. The first
Bush.
I didn't know.
I mean, Justice Kennedy was appointed by, and he's one of those judges that tends to be a middle line.
He has been absolutely. And we were talking about some of the precedent that led up to this opinion on the gay marriage issue. There were cases where you had Scalia voting for gay rights.
Exactly.
Because it basically was in line with his judicial doctrine. And you had someone like a Sotomayor, which I want you to repeat it 3 times. Really.
Sotomayor?
Not bad. Someone like Sotomayor voting against it because it was against her judicial doctrine. So I think judicial doctrine has more to do than the political views.
Absolutely.
And I think that's
what people have to
understand.
And one of the quotes I wanted to read from Robert's dissent, because I think it does say, it's understand well what my dissent is about. It's not about whether, in my judgment, the institute of marriage should be changed to include same-sex couples. It is instead about whether, in our democratic republic, that decision should rest with the people acting through their elected representatives or with 5 lawyers who happen to hold commissions authorizing them to resolve legal disputes according to law. The Constitution leaves no doubt about the answer, in his opinion.
Right.
And I think the point he made at the end was, if you are among the many Americans of whatever sexual orientation who favor expanding same-sex marriage, by all means celebrate today's decision. Celebrate the achievement of a desired goal. Celebrate the opportunity for a new expression of commitment to a partner. Celebrate the availability of new benefits. But do not celebrate the Constitution. It had nothing to do with it. And again, I do believe, and you would read throughout the opinion, there are a lot of quotes where he says that he has no prejudice. He feels that he understands that this is important to many people. He just believes that the Constitution delegates this to the states and it's not a federal basis.
Speaking of the opinion, how did you print it? Where did you find it?
I went to the Supreme Court's website because you can get their published opinion.
Okay, you didn't do Westlaw? See,
no, I didn't do it.
We should have practiced before, because it's a nice segue to the next topic real quick.
Okay. I'm sorry, I used Westlaw to get the opinion. Yes, what's your segue, Gus?
So we have a picture that should be coming up, because for those of you who are in the legal profession, Westlaw Classic is actually going to cease to exist officially in August of this year. We're now completely moved into what's called Westlaw Next, which is all these sort of more web-based stuff. But I thought the picture, Bueller, that we have picked for this segment of the computer, which I didn't recognize it, but when I showed it to you earlier, there it is. This is your home computer here, isn't it?
For those of you that are able to watch the video, you see a computer that looks literally out of something.
Looks like an old Mac.
We've been joking about Bueller. But to do another Matthew Broderick movie, War Games, with Matthew Broderick.
Shall
that's the computer.
I think.
Yeah.
Shall we play a game?
All right, the show's completely digressing.
Really
you were on a high horse earlier, preaching about judicial doctrine and Roberts, and now
it's a movie about how tic-tac-toe saved the world. But it's actually a pretty good movie if you're a Broderick fan at all. One of his early movies.
Very underrated.
It really is. But,
so what we're looking at here is, aside from Neil's home computer,
that is the computer that I used for Westlaw when I was in law school, yes, in 1991.
An old computer, and it's got some of the keys, special keyboards for the searches. Well, I'm sorry to say, Neil, but that's no longer going to be available in literally 2 months from now. But I think it's a part of a bigger topic. It touches on the progress, right? The technology and the impact that it's having on not just in general, but obviously in the legal industry. And now, remember, you probably recall the days when you used to have to go to the library and search for everything.
Right.
Now
exactly.
you just
Now it's
get
all
online and do the searches. And I'm sure next week Jim will tell us about some of the cool things they have for court reporting and all that stuff. I mean, technology is a way of life now. But
absolutely.
But keep the computer. Keep the computer because it might be a collector's item.
But it was good to learn. It's as I think back to the movie Princess Bride, when Peter Falk is starting to read the story to his young grandson.
Yes.
He's playing his video game on the computer, and he says, "When I was your age,"
Fred Savage.
Fred Savage. Yeah, when I was your age, we used to read stories in things called books. and that movie was done how many years ago? Probably 20 years ago. So
Yeah, that reminds me. My daughter was, because we're getting on 18. I'm driving up to Ohio, so it's 18 hours, and so she's going through and picking up movies to hopefully, to obviously keep her occupied. And so I'm trying to recommend some good 80s movies. She's like, no, nothing in the 80s or 90s. There's such good movies. I mean, I'm kind of old school, but I think some of the older movies.
My daughter's gotten into action stuff. In fact, we just finished watching the Die Hard series, and we've gone into Terminator now.
Nice.
And so she's
now I know why she's having trouble sleeping at night.
Is that what,
I mean,
you think that's what,
seriously,
you don't think it's the puppy keeping us up late at night?
No. So we just got our 2-minute warning about 30 seconds ago. So why don't I'll give you a whole minute.
A whole minute, wow.
To the takeaway.
In a summary,
and don't forget about the soccer. Make sure you tied all those things together.
We
started with the soccer event, Supreme Court opinion, and then the Westlaw.
Wow. Well, I will say we ended, I'll do it backwards. We ended talking about how...
Your time is running out.
Yeah, I will. Okay, we in the middle we talked about doing it backwards, but that's a completely different. We ended with a technological era where we've come a long way, talking about Westlaw and technology. We've also come a long way with our Supreme Court in a very, very important opinion that came out last week, and I think it's the right opinion.
Good.
And then we moved to sports again, just like. Before we were talking about...
You're going to eat up to my time.
I mean, up too much time, then I'll end with the sports. Yeah.
I'm going to filibuster because you're going to get yourself in trouble. Let's bring up the quote of the day, the deep thought. There we go. This is from an unknown who said, whenever you find yourself doubting how far you can go, just remember how far you have come. Remember everything you have faced, all the battles you have won, and all the fears you have overcome. I think that was excellent. I'm surprised no one described their name to it. So I'm going to change that. And I'm going to put Gus Bravo after it.
Actually,
I'm going to give myself that credit.
Okay, I'll give you that credit.
Thank you. Well, tune in again next week with Neil and Jim. Will be sitting in this chair. Hopefully
I think Gus is going to call in, maybe.
Yes, I'll try to call in. Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil.
All right. Have a good evening, everybody.
You have been listening to Attorney Confidential with Gus Bravo and Neil Kotze, two rated AV trial attorneys with over 40 years of experience. Tune in next week for another episode of entertainment, insight, and just plain fun. That's Monday, 6 p.m. on WNN, 1470 AM. See you next Monday for more Attorney Confidential. The opinions